G'day guys, and welcome back to the channel. Now ladies, this video is for you. Now today I'm going to be looking at the topic of whether women should stay home or whether we can actually go out and work. So let's get right into it. Now the first passage I want to look at is in Genesis chapter 2 verse 18, where it reads, "Then Yahweh God said, 'It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make him a helper suitable for him.'" Now, some people use this verse to support their idea that women were created to basically cook and clean and to serve the husband. And they use it also to support their idea that women were never made to have a career or to work outside of the home. But we have to remember that when Eve came along, when Eve was created, there was no house, there were no dishes to be done, there were no floors to be mopped or vacuumed, and so forth. So what does this idea of being a man's helper actually mean? Now, if we were to look at this word helper in the Old Testament or say in the Hebrew, you'll notice that this same word used in Genesis chapter 2 verse 18 is actually the same word that basically is a reference to God as Israel's helper. So we see this being used in a number of different passages. For example, Deuteronomy 33:26, "There is none like the God of Jeshurun, who rides the heavens to your help, and through the skies in his majesty." And then again in Psalm 33 verse 20, "Our soul is patient for Yahweh, he is our help and our shield." Psalms 124 verse 8, "Our help is in the name of Yahweh, who made heaven and earth." Psalm 146:5, "How blessed is he whose help is the God of Jacob, whose hope is in Yahweh his God." So how does a woman help a man? Well, in the context of Genesis 2 verse 18, the woman has come along to help man in his solitude, in his loneliness. It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make him a helper suitable for him. So we can see she's come along as a helper so that Adam would not be alone. In the NIV commentary, it says that any suggestion that this particular word denotes one who has only an associate or subordinate status to a senior member is refuted by the fact that most frequently this same word describes Yahweh's relationship to Israel. So he is Israel's helper, and the woman in Genesis 2 delivers or basically saves the man from his state of loneliness or solitude. We can see that she's not been created to serve him or to be his slave, but she's been created as his equal and to basically be his friend, his companion. And a man's wife really ought to be his best friend. If we were to look at Proverbs 18 verse 22, it says, "He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from Yahweh." And then a couple of verses later, in verse 24, it says, "A man of too many friends comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother." Now, many people assume that this friend who sticks closer than a brother is often referred to as a male's best friend, a male's best male friend. And while that can often, be the case, or at least be possible, the closest relationship in this context here is actually a man's wife. When a man goes through a difficult time and for some reason he may lose all his friends, if he is married to a good wife, then his wife will stick closer to him than a brother. Now, you're probably wondering, what about the New Testament? Now, we know in the New Testament, Paul instructs Titus about women being keepers of the home. So let's look at this passage in its context. So we're looking at Titus 2, starting at verse 3 and reading until 5. "Older women likewise are to be reverent in their behaviour, not malicious gossips, nor enslaved to much wine, teaching what is good, so that they may instruct the young women in sensibility, to love their husbands, to love their children, to be sensible, pure, workers at home, kind, being subject to their own husbands, so that the word of God will not be slandered. Now, some people use this passage to argue that, women are to be stay-at-home wives, to be stay-at-home mothers, they're just to be keepers of the home. But really, we shouldn't be building a doctrine based on one verse. Now, this verse, keepers of the home or workers at home, basically comes from one very rare Greek word that can be used or understood in different ways. Now, I've looked at D.A. Carson's study Bible notes, and this is what he says. Being busy at home or workers at home is basically a rare Greek word, oikourgos, which can also be translated as being good managers of the household. And this is a command not to stay cooped up at home, but to basically exercise managerial gifts and skills for the family's sake. This does not rule out working outside of the home, because we can see this in the Bible, for example, Proverbs 31 verses 16, 18 and 24, but it confirms responsibility for domestic oversight. So basically this idea of being workers at home, women being workers at home or keepers of the home, is basically a duty where we have that role. We've been gifted with this role to basically ensure that our household is running smoothly as it should, to ensure that certain jobs are being done, to ensure the children are taken care of, to ensure there's food on the table. It's our responsibility to ensure that the household is being managed well. If we were to think about it logically, we actually need women to be in the workforce, because without women, I imagine that a lot of workplaces would actually fall apart. We need women to be the first point of contact in a certain kind of environment, whether it be medical, whether it be a shop front, whether it be just going into a clothing type store. A lot of the time women are actually better suited for these kinds of roles. I'm not saying that men shouldn't be in these roles, but there are often times where women are obviously better suited for particular roles. If we look at healthcare, for example, we need women nurses, we need women doctors, we need midwives, we need radiologists. At times as a woman, you just want to be seen by another woman in a if it's for a particular health reason. If we have to have a mammogram, we don't want that to be done by a man. Personally, I think that would be very weird. Pregnancy things, we would naturally tend to be more drawn to being looked after by a woman. So certain things, again, are generally better suited for the woman. Another example is female women in the police force. For me, I'm not someone who's ever had to be patted down by a cop or searched by a cop, but if so, I wouldn't want that necessarily to be done by a man. I would want that to be done by a woman if I ever had to go through that. So again, women are needed. Even like women lawyers, if you're someone who's gone through abuse or the victim of abuse, you might find that a woman has a different perspective on things, that she might understand you better rather than seeing a man. So these sorts of things as well could be taken into account. Another example is like social workers and counsellors. You might not necessarily want to be counselled by a male. You might find that whatever it is that you're going through, you might feel that a woman is better suited for talking to about certain things that are going on in your private life. For me, I run my own business in the wedding industry, and I often see a lot of women in the wedding industry doing things. So even like florists, most of the time, it's women who are the florists. You don't generally see a lot of men. They may work behind the scenes to do a lot of the deliveries, but perhaps the woman is actually better suited to know what flowers go with what flowers are in season, colour combinations when it comes to putting together like wedding bouquets and stuff like that, your buttonholes for weddings. Again, women are better suited for particular roles. And again, I'm not saying that men can't do these things, but Obviously, there are some particular roles that women have better strengths in and have better eye for detail in. Now, you might be wondering, well, what about women who currently have children? Can they leave their children in care while they go off to work? Can they leave it with someone who can babysit them while they go off to work? Now, if that was me in that particular situation, I would look at my family and my children as my primary goal, and basically I would, especially in this day and age, I would not leave my children basically in anyone's care, especially if I didn't know them, and go off to work. I would see that my current children, to raise them and to teach them and train them in the ways of the Lord, that would be my ministry, and I would want to focus on that. And I think a lot of the time, especially for women who do have children and they end up going back to work after X amount of time, a lot of women do actually regret that they do that, because they leave their children in the care of someone else, and they're basically raised by someone else, and you get them for the evenings. And I think in this day and age where so much is going on, so much is changing, we really, as Christians, can't afford to do that. And I think if, as Christians, we are having children, then we should have that responsibility to raise our children, to raise and train them well, rather than putting them in care and us going off to work. However, if you're someone who has children and you have time during the day that you can set aside to learning a new skill, so that later on when your children are older that you may be able to use those skills, then great. I think that's great. I think that's fantastic. But to go off to work and leave your children with someone else, I think obviously that also requires a discussion with your spouse, and it requires wisdom as well. But overall, as a whole, whether women can actually go out and work, I definitely don't see anything wrong with that, and we obviously see that in the Bible as well. You've got Ruth, who goes out into the field, gleaning in the field. You've got obviously the Proverbs 31 woman, who every woman just wants to aspire to be. You've got Lydia, who's the seller of purple or garments. You've got Deborah, who's a judge. Does that mean Deborah never left her home and just worked from home? No, she was out there leading an army. So to say that women have to stay home and never leave the house and just cook and clean is actually false. Anyway, I hope you've liked this video. Please leave a comment. I would love to know your thoughts, and I'll see you in my next video. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.